Um, Hello again. It is wonderful to see everyone out this morning. It was also a wonderful surprise for me to have been given the opportunity last week to prepare a lesson that we will go through today. I always count it a blessing to be able to serve in any capacity. Anything that we can do, anytime my name can be written on the board to serve in any way, things that may seem simple or repetitive, I always count it as a blessing. So it's all obviously a wonderful opportunity for me to be able to stand before you this morning. God's word is amazing. There are times when you have lots of time to prepare, and you might have something on your mind that you've been thinking about that's very complex, and it just takes a lot of time, and you put it together and you weave it very, very tight together, and then you still in that time probably find things that you missed or you didn't understand, and that will be a process that goes on forever. And there's other times where you have a little bit less time. And the great thing about having been a Bible student for a long time and a Christian for a while is there's just stories, especially of being a kid growing up in the church, as I was very, very blessed to be one. There are just stories that you remember from childhood that you could repeat, no problem. And I decided this morning that's what we'd do. I want to go through the account of Samson. Samson is found in the book of Judges. Judges chapter 13 is the start of the account for Samson. I really loved the book of Judges. When I attended at Northwest in College Station several years ago, I was able to teach a middle school boys class on the book of Judges. And that is the class that you want to teach if you've got the middle school boys, is the book of Judges. Because there's so much stuff in there that just got the boys' ears perked up. And, I always say a big kid, but I guess I'm a grown kid myself, so I enjoyed going through that just as much, and I hope we'll go through it and we'll enjoy it this morning. I also have, yes, it is on the board. I'm sorry, on the projector, some images, and some of these things I'll oftentimes reference them when I'm here talking. These are some images from books, not all of them, but as many as I could find from books that I had as a child that just bring back the memories. And so when anyone's up here teaching a lesson or whatever I'm studying and I'm thinking about Samson or David or whatever it is, I just have these pictures in my mind from these books that shaped those visuals in my mind from a long time ago. So I'm happy to be able to share some of those with you. I would like, if we could, to, man, Danny, it's tough. You have limited time when you're up here. I sympathize on that with you. But we're going to go through as much of the story of Samson as we can, hopefully pick out a few lessons, some bits of advice that we can give ourselves from Samson. And then there's a question. It's not a question that's posed in the text, but there's a question that I'm going to pull out of it in chapter 13 that I think is a difficult thing that a lot of us struggle with, and especially people outside of the church, when they see someone like Samson being used by God, they just kind of question, like, how can that be, especially when you know about the events of Samson's life. So let's start together. In chapter 13 of the book of Judges, we actually start before Samson is born. We learn of a man there named Manoah who had a wife. She was sterile, meaning that she was unable to have children. She was visited by an angel of the Lord, and the angel of the Lord comes to her. This is in verse 3 of chapter 13. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "You are sterile and childless, but you are going to conceive and have a son. Now see to it that he drinks no wine or fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean, because you will conceive and give birth to a son. No razor may be used on his head, because the boy is to be a Nazarite, set apart from God from birth, and he will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines." So already we're kind of off to a somewhat unique start, right? This is the second time we've seen the birth of a child predicted by an angel. Remember, the first one was Isaac, right, in the book of Genesis. Here's Samson being predicted, and we're going to get two more in the beginning stages of the New Testament. Remember who those are, right? Obviously Jesus, and the second one, John the Baptist, right? I hear it out there. I always love to hear that back. So already a somewhat unique circumstance here with the prediction of his birth. And then we see as well that there is a task that's set forth for Samson. He is set apart for a certain reason. It says there in verse 5, he will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. We know about the book of Judges, right? This is a time where it says in often places, Israel was without a king. Without a king doesn't just mean that they were without a physical king, right? One to lead them. They also lived throughout this period of time really without God as their king. So they had little to no direction in the time other than when a judge would be raised up and presented for them for their renewal back, their revival from and deliverance from the hand of the oppressors, and then there were renewal back, which we know was always just a temporary bit of time. So the woman, she goes, she's been approached by this angel. The angel is what you'll see here in just a minute, but floating there as angels tend to do in terms of our minds. The man of God came to me. She goes and runs to her husbands and tells him this, and I love the expression she gives to him. She says in verse 6, "A man of God came to me. He looked like an angel of God. Very awesome." That's how you use the word awesome. We use the word awesome in lots of ways, right? That's how you use it. We have not yet been awed. We probably think we have, and there's some things in our life that we know are clearly by the hand of God. Look around, right? This is as close to awesome as we're going to have on this earth, right? The gathering of the saints and everyone together. But we've yet to really see awesome. But we will, right? And I love her expression there, and that's how we should use the word. Very awesome was his appearance. So she gives the news, right? It's got to be great news for a woman that's been sterile her whole life. And you know, especially given the day and time, the importance on having a child to carry on the lineage of a family. And we at this time as well are very blessed to have several young expecting families. I want to point you to verse 8 in terms of the response that Manoah gave when he heard he was going to have a son. Look at this, or going to have a child, and thereby we know to be a son. Then Manoah said in verse 8, he prayed to the Lord, "O Lord, I beg you, let the man of God you sent come back to us to teach us how to bring up the boy who is to be born." Now, obviously, you wouldn't go into a prayer and say, send back an angel, because I know to our knowledge that we haven't seen them, right? But the prayer and the begging of, teach me how to raise this child. That's the first bit of advice we can see from the book of Samson, especially given, again, the young families that we have that are expecting here now. Keep that in mind. So Manoah gets up. God's prayer, he hears the prayer. As we know, God is always gives his attention to us. He hears the prayer. He sends the angel, the man, back. When he sees them, as is usually the case, the man is a little bit, at least a step, but probably a step and a half to 2 steps behind the wife, because she remembers, right? She was already aware that this was an angel from God, very awesome, right? But there's going to be an interaction between the man and the angel. A sacrifice is offered up to God because of the great things that are happening, and that's where you see this picture here. This is shown in chapter 13 and verse 20. During the sacrifice, as the flame blazed up from the altar towards heaven, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame. Again, that's what you see behind me. The angel of the Lord ascended in the flame. Seeing this, Manoah and his wife fell with their faces to the ground. And when the angel of the Lord did not show himself again to Manoah and his wife, Manoah then realized that it was the angel of the Lord. His response is funny in verse 22. "We are doomed to die," he said to his wife. "We have seen God." And again, as we kind of said, the wife being a step ahead, his wife answered in 23, "If the Lord had meant to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and a grain offering from our hands, nor shown us all the things now and told us this." So it's good we have those wives around because Manoah was definitely in a panic right there. And that leads us to the birth of Samson. In verse 24, it says, "The woman gave birth to a boy and named him Samson. And he grew, and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir in him while he was in Mahanaim of Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol." So the question I'm going to ask you there that we're going to have to rush towards, actually, is, do you think at this time, we've seen that he's been set apart from for work? And we all here know, we're all familiar, even though we'll go through it, of the story of Samson. Do you think that God set him apart with the thought and the intention of all the circumstances that Samson was going to find himself in? Do you think that when he grew and the Lord blessed him and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir in him, that the Lord was stirring him into all the choices that he made? I'm going to give my opinion at the end of it, but just think of that for yourself as we go through some of these actions, and we know the Lord is working in him. To ask ourselves, what is it that we think the Lord's doing, and what are these choices that Samson makes? So chapter 14, Samson starts off on the wrong foot. right? He goes down to Timnah, which is in Philistia. We know enemies of the Israelite people. We know as well from the book of Numbers, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, that you're not to intermarry with them as well. But he finds a woman there. He says in verse 1, I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. His father and mother replied, Isn't there an acceptable woman from your relatives among all the people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife? But Samson said to his father, Get her for me. She's the right one for me. This is the NIV. A lot of translations says, she's right for me in my eyes. It's right in my eyes. And so here's our second bit of advice. Here's our second lesson for everyone. What's right in our eyes is not the most important thing. When finding a relationship as well, your happiness and how great you match together is also not the most important thing. I hear this said oftentimes as well. You all know I'm relatively new to this anyways, but love is also not the most important thing. You can love someone, but that doesn't mean that it's right? God has laid forth rules and regulations for us and things that we have forward which are meant to guide us in the right path, right? So we always have to take off the idea that just what's right in our eyes is not always and oftentimes is not what's right. And we have to be looking for what's right in God's eyes. Furthermore, if you're parents and you have children who are at the age where they're looking to get married, you have a responsibility as well, right? Especially in this day and age when this is written, Samson's father would have had a massive part to say in his marriage. And we see, and we're going to see, that essentially he goes along with it. So parents, you have to be involved. You have to look when your parents are in relationships, looking to get married. You have to be vocal. I know it can be tough to, I don't know. I assume it can be tough because I'm not a parent, to not want to hurt and damage those relationships. But the most important thing is everyone's soul, right? As opposed, again, to the temporal happiness. So that's the second point there, the second piece of advice. So Samson then goes down. He's going to meet his new wife. On his way down, he runs into a lion who goes to attack him. Any boys who grew up in the 90s or the early 2000s like I did know this move is known as the crippler crossface. And it's a pretty effective move. It was used intensely on the playground. When I was a kid, I was more of a speed person, but if anyone got you locked in this one, you were not in good shape. But apparently it wasn't created in the 90s. It was created in 12 or 1300 BC when Samson goes to fight this lion. But I always enjoy this picture and have it as a firm memory from myself as a kid. So Samson, we remember his vows as a Nazirite. We remember what the rules and regulations for those are. It's stated in chapter 13. It's also stated in Numbers chapter 6. He kills the lion. We know that's already a problem, right? Because he's taken from the honey. He's taken from a carcass and been close to it, and that's against the rules for a Nazirite. So if we needed another strike, there's strike 2 at least from marrying outside of Israel, and then as well coming in contact with the carcass. At some point, he goes back down again for a wedding feast, and from there he takes honey from it and he gives it to his parents. So not only is he desecrating himself, but he's doing the same thing to his parents as well. And then he begins what I really think of as kind of a cheat. He creates a riddle that he gives to the people there at the wedding feast that really only he knew the answer to, right? He in his mind has a leg up. And as he does that, he comes into what's going to be, I'm not going to belabor this one, but a third piece of advice: when you get yourself a wife or a husband, don't get a nagger. Don't get someone who nags you, right? Because for 7 days he's nagged until he ultimately gives up the answer as to why or to what the riddle is. And that turns him into a huge debt, right? So as he takes this debt, the only way he can repay it, because he doesn't have the money to do it, is to go and to kill fellow Philistines and to pay off that debt from the booty that he savaged from all of them. So that concludes us in chapter 14. We move forward into 15, and here's the second lesson that we have. So Samson has stormed off after he's repaid his debt. He's pouting. His wife's been given away to another man by her father because he's just stormed off and left. And when he goes back, he finds out that his wife has been given away. And so here's the bit of advice and the thing that I want to touch on in verse 15. When Samson finds out that his wife has been given away in chapter 3 of verse 15, he says, "This time I have a right to get even with the Philistines." So my question for you is, what has ever good come from trying to get even? When you have had something done from you and you get even with someone, how often has that person said to themselves, "Well, I guess now we're even. You know, I did something to wrong someone, and now my stance is, well, they got me back," right? That's not how it goes. And that's not how it goes here. It's like a lie, right? It continues to escalate and grow more and more and more. So Samson, I got another good picture here. His method for getting even is to catch 300 foxes, tie them in pairs, tail by tail, and to set them free into the wheat harvest. This is the time he's back down at the time of the harvest, and to completely roast every bit of wheat and grain that the Philistines had. I grew up in East Texas. I don't know how you could ever catch 300 foxes. The most you ever see from a fox is you're driving late at night and you see the tail like off into the high grass. I don't know how he did it, but somehow he was able to catch 300 foxes and tie them. And so in his mind, now we're even, right? Things are good. What about in the Philistines' mind? We're not even anymore, right? Even though it's an eye for eye at this point, we're not even. So the Philistines then say, well, who did this? Well, it was Samson, and here's his family, his Philistine family, and they go and they burn each of them. And then from there, Samson says again, well, now I guess I got to get even again. Now I have the chance. Since you've acted like this, I won't stop until I get my revenge on you, says Samson. And he attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them. And then he went and hid in the rock. So then we have a period of time where, again, now Samson says, now we're even again. Philistines agree? No. So they search him out. They come and camp near Judah. When they camp near Judah, the people from Judah see him. And they say, what are you doing? Well, we're coming to get Samson. He's the one who's been tormenting us. So from that, the men go to Samson and hand him over to them. But as he hands them over to the Philistines, we know that he was able to break free from his bonds. And then it says he slaughtered another 1,000 men. That's in verse 14. As he approached Lehi, the Philistines came toward him, shouting, "The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. The ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped. And finding the fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men." If we thought Shamgar was good in chapter 3, taking down 600 men with an ox goad, look at what we have now. And then we have a period of time where he strikes down these men. He finds himself in thirst, about to die, and God rescues him from that. So God continuing to preserve Samson. We had the question at the beginning, how is God acting through Samson? How is God continuing to allow Samson to act and allowing him to then accomplish his will? And again, we see him here. Could have let him die there, but keeps him alive. Samson, I think at this point, really becomes the judge. From that moment forward, he kind of becomes the judge over Israel for the next 20 years. And we know that they're at war with the Philistines. So knowing that he's in charge now and knowing his responsibility, we know that Samson's not going to head back into Philistia for any reason, right? Because they're enemies. That's what we see at the end of chapter 15. So we don't have to worry about that anymore. But actually, we pick up in 16 of verse 1, and it says, one day Samson went down to Gaza. And if you're unaware, Gaza is in the region of Philistia, right? So as much physical strength has been shown by Samson, spiritual weakness and lack of foresight is in just as much abundance as we see his physical strength. So Samson will go to Gaza. He will lay with a prostitute. The men see him coming in. They hatch a plan to kill him. But again, by God's providence, I'm sure, he wakes up in the middle of the night, leaves, but on his way out with the doors to the city locked, what does he have to do? He tears the whole, I remember this one as a kid. I really like this one. He tears the whole set of doors off the city wall and carries them not out of the city. Doesn't just get himself up, but he goes all the way up to the top of the hill facing Hebron. And remember, at this time, Hebron was kind of acting as the capital of Judah, right? So it would have been known exactly what happened here in this instance. Samson has to have learned his lesson, right? We have to have finally made it there by now. Unfortunately, we let his desires and what's right to him win again. Sometime later, it says in verse 4 of chapter 16, it says, Samson fell in love with Delilah. We know the story of Delilah, and with a short amount of time, I'm not going to go through it. But I just want to ask you a question out this. Does it sound like you've fallen in love with someone when their goal is to hand you over to the enemy? And ask ourselves that as well. In our case, what and who is the enemy? It might not be the Philistines, but it's far more consequential than the Philistines. If she did love him, we can put a price tag on how much she loved him, right? She must have loved him 1,099 shekels of silver, because in verse 5 it says that she agreed to betray him, brings up memories of Judas, right, for 1,100 shekels of silver. So we know he has another nagger, as we can say, and he's nagged for days. He lies to his wife, right? We can ask that our question as well. If we feel like we love someone, we say we love someone, do we lie to them? Do you lie to the people you love? I don't see any reason to, right? It would also beg the question, is the Holy Spirit wrong here in revealing and saying that Samson loved Delilah? When in Samson's mind, Samson did love Delilah, but Samson just didn't know what love was, other than really love for himself. So Samson goes, he is with Delilah. She ultimately betrays him, gets the secret out of him, and his strength is taken from him. There's a very sad verse 20 of chapter 16. It says, then she, being Delilah, called, Samson, the Philistines are upon you, right? His hair is gone by this point. His strength is gone. He awoke from his sleep and he thought, I'll go out as before and I'll shake myself free. But, we always talk about that word, but he did not know that the Lord had left him. One of the saddest verses in the Old Testament. I feel like we were talking about sad verses in classes on a Wednesday night a couple months ago, and this definitely would be one of them. It also says, I found what I thought to be an interesting and a true quote in kind of some preparation for this. It says that sin will bind you and then it will blind you. And that's really what happened to Samson, right? I think in the order it says here, he was blind and then he was bound. But really what happened to him is he was bound by his sin. He's been bound by sin because his lack of repentance and his lack of a search for God for his whole life. And now he's been literally blinded. Not to mention the spiritual blinding that he's allowed himself to become numb to. So then we know the rest of the story. Again, in the short amount of time that we have here, there's Samson and Delilah as she has cut his hair. He's sent to prison. He's made to grind, it says. So he's spent there his time as really a worthless servant, really just doing a task made to humiliate and make fun of him. And then he's brought out at a feast that's being thrown by the Philistines for Dagon. The Philistines should have known something was up with Dagon by the time we get through all of these issues. By the time we're having a feast for him and the temple collapses, or by the time they bring the Ark of the Covenant into the town and Dagon, his statue falls over face forward multiple times, at some point they should have got the hint about Dagon. But they never did. So he's brought and paraded out, and in that time, his hair has grown back a bit, right? Because he's been in jail for some time, and he cries out to God for one more time to ask for the strength, and he collapses the building there. And it says that he killed more people in this event than he killed in his whole time, while he was living. So a tragic kind of story and end. So as I see we're running out of time, you were right. We didn't have much time, Brother David. I want to go back to that question and just ask, how is it that God can continue to work through someone who is just caught up in so much evil? And it goes back to saying that he was set apart from the beginning. And what I would offer up, in my opinion, as the answer here, is that God's will is going to be accomplished. I don't believe that God's will was that Samson would live the life that he did. I don't believe that. I believe he could have perfectly well led against the Philistines in a way that caused far less destruction and far less trouble for himself and for the people of Judah. I truly believe that. But regardless of the choices that people make, God's will is going to be accomplished. I'm in Isaiah chapter 55, just to give you a verse in that. Isaiah chapter 55 in verse 10, it says, "As the rain and the snow come down from come down from heaven, and do not return to it without watering the earth, and making it bud and flourish, so that it yields seed from the sower and bread for the eater, so is my word that goes forth from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it." So I know that's something that we struggle with in our lives. We see people around us who are profiting, who seem to be evil, people who are good, and we see bad things happen to them. Each one of us have a purpose, and God's will is going to be accomplished through that. A good way, I think, to wrap it up, with the lack of time we have left, is to reference Hebrews chapter 11, right? Where I want to hold on to this as a mention of Samson. When you ask, what was the end? What was the eternal destiny of Samson? All I can really hold on is verse 32 of Hebrews chapter 11, as we're talking about the hall of faith here, right? All these heroes in faith, it says, "And what more shall I say? I do not have time to talk about Gideon, Barak, Samson," right? Mentioned in there. So even with it, is the life that Samson lived. What a glorious and blessed thing to be able to hold on to the fact that God's desire is to bless, not to judge. His desire is to welcome you back, not to judge you to damnation. So I'm going to cut it off there without running short. Sorry, it had to be a bit abbreviated. I will offer an invitation up to any of those here who may require it. Whether you are not a Christian and you need to be baptized into Christ for the remission of your sins, or whether you're a Christian who has wandered away from God, anything that you need, we are here to serve, and God is able. We are here to do anything we can to help you. I'll make that invitation known. If there's anything you need, please come forward now as we stand and as we sing.